Share your scariest stories from your life.
Evening Story.
Let me start by saying that I don't believe in ghosts, but I lived in a haunted house for 8 months. We rented this house with 5 of my friends. I often woke up to the sound of someone running around the house, especially when I was alone. Light switches worked by themselves, doors slammed, stuff like that. More than once I caught sleep paralysis. And in general, my neighbors also noticed this. But the worst thing was when the child crawled into the bed from behind and hid under the covers. But we didn't have any children with us.
One day, I thought of a girl I went to college with and hadn't seen in 30 years. I decided to Google her name and found an obituary. It was posted a few hours ago.
I went missing for 3 days when I was 12. I still have no idea what happened.
I was about 10 years old. I was lying and trying to sleep when I heard a strange sound from somewhere in the ceiling. In the following days, I began to notice that the room was very hot, although the ventilation had only recently been replaced, so my father decided to check the shaft. When he bent down for some instrument, I raised my head and saw a terrible picture. A thin man was looking at us through the ventilation. I pretended not to notice him and wanted to run away, but I was afraid to leave 2 cats at home. So I took a paper towel and a pen and wrote, "There's a man in my vent." Dad did not make out my scribbles and asked what I wrote. And then we heard a thud from upstairs. My father immediately understood everything, grabbed me and called the police. This man was arrested, and I still remember how I raised my head. I see his face, and I can't even scream out of fear.
I walk and talk in my sleep. Adopted this habit from my father. This usually leads to a lot of funny situations, but something terrible happened when I was 7 or 8. We lived in a 2-story house with a very steep staircase of 50 steps. In a dream, I climbed to the very top and woke up exactly at that second when I flew from this ladder to the very bottom. I was still small and could not even explain to my frightened parents why I fell.
Through the baby monitor, I heard a woman singing very softly in the room with my daughter. This repeated itself for several nights in a row, and I already believed that the house was cursed. He remembered how the doors opened by themselves, remembered all the strange sounds that he heard in the house. Until one night, I heard Taylor Swift through the Bad Blood baby monitor. Damn Chinese baby monitor managed to connect to the local radio station with pop music.
When I was 14, there was a clock next to my bed with big red numbers. It was evening. I had already gone to bed and decided to look at the time. It was 10:24. I blinked, just blinked. It was 10:24 on the clock, but it was already morning. The light flooded the room. I swear I didn't sleep. All I remember is blinking and 12 hours go by. I spent the rest of the day tired and felt like I hadn't slept all night.
I got into the car with my friends, slammed the door, and at that moment a screeching female laugh was heard from outside. But we were all already in the car, and there was not a soul outside.
One night I was lying on my side and already starting to fall asleep when I felt a slight pull on the blanket behind my back. I immediately realized that it was a cat walking on it, and then I opened my eyes and saw a sleeping cat in front of me.
I had a case. When I was 16, there was a guitar playing in my room next to my sofa at night, in a closed case. First from the top string to the bottom, then vice versa. Even my cat reacted. He jumped onto the nightstand where the guitar stood, and after the second loose, began to hiss and scratch the cover with his claws. After that, there was a sound, as if all the strings were clamped with fingers and led up and down. It was at 2 in the morning. I could not fall asleep until 4. Because after this sound up down with some periodicity, as if someone was scratching the cover from the inside, and I don't know how to explain it.
I had one case when I was 7 or 8. I was lying on the bed, I was hiding under the covers with my head, I got hot, and I decided to breathe. Lifting the covers, I saw him. A black silhouette sitting on my sister's bed. We sleep in the same room with her. I immediately closed the blanket, but decided to look at him again. I lifted the blanket. He was sitting on my bed. And this is not sleep paralysis or sleep. The next day, it happened exactly the same, but with the silhouette of a woman. I was 7 and it was very scary.
I am now 16 years old. When I was 13, I once lay on the bed at night. It was about 1 in the morning. I just sat on the phone as always. Then someone's face seemed to me in the dark. I put down the phone and began to look at the place where it was. Then 2 faces appeared in front of me, one thin, white, and the second was clown. Something grabbed my hand. I couldn't scream and move, as if something was holding me and as if someone's hand was covering my mouth. I somehow covered myself with a blanket, and in a split second I fell asleep, although I did not want to sleep at all. In the morning I had a red, very large handprint on my hand. I don't know what it was, but I'm still very afraid.
In December 2013, I had a dream. In the apartment where my grandparents lived before they died, all my dead relatives are in the kitchen. I saw them as in an old photograph in the semi-darkness, in black and white. They were sitting in the front row, standing in the back row, and on the side, half turned, was my mother. I was at the kitchen door. Mom separated from the others and came up to me, followed by Dad. Mom said, "We will take your disease and give it to another person." I protested, "No, I forbid. This is wrong. Even if this person is bad." The parents returned to the kitchen and took their places in the photo. In a dream, I did not see their faces. I remember exactly. I just knew somehow who was who. In January 2014, after the New Year holidays, I was hospitalized by ambulance with an exacerbation of chronic pancreatitis. Now I know what kind of disease they wanted to take away from me, but I did not give it back. I live with her now, and I remember the dream quite clearly, and for some reason, I still feel an unpleasant aftertaste from it, as if it was not my parents and relatives, but someone hiding under their guise, someone very bad.
I went to a Texas water park. I climbed the highest hill with an almost vertical descent. There were signs everywhere that you cannot push off before the descent. But I was an 18-year-old fool and decided to play around. I jumped up and found myself in the air over the hill, height 30 meters, concrete below. I'm slowly picking up speed like in slow motion, by some miracle. I plopped down the hill and went down. A friend said that he really thought that I would fall past the slide and crash. But I wouldn't crash. Then I found out that a net was stretched below for idiots like me.
I live with my mother and younger brother. My parents are divorced and I don't see my father anymore. We lived in an apartment on the 20th floor. Then I was 8 years old. And my mother and brother went about their business, because of which I often remained alone at home. By this time, I had adapted to live alone, and the fact that I was alone in the apartment did not frighten me. But there was one moment. My aunt with her daughter 15 years old and son 12 years old asked to move in with us. As their apartment was taken away from them due to debts, my family took them in and we started living together. One day, my aunt's eldest daughter wanted to invoke what spirit she saw on the internet. I thought something like, Chucky, the Queen of Spades, but no. She prepared a piece of paper where a pencil lay on top of another to twist, and there were yes or no answers. After we had fun, we threw this sheet away and did not remember anymore. But when I began to stay alone at home, I began to hear some kind of rustling, roaring, and heavy objects were constantly falling. I was very scared, but I didn't tell anyone because they wouldn't believe me and consider me crazy. The next morning, when everyone sat down to breakfast, my aunt began to behave strangely. She constantly moved, looked around, and there was unimaginable horror on her face. It turned out that everyone ate first and left, and my aunt and I stayed in the kitchen. At one point she asks, "Did you see him too?" I was surprised and thought, here's my chance to tell everything that was going on in my soul. After I told her, she was horrified, and the next week she moved with her children to some kind of hostel. I told my mother everything, and to her surprise she also believed, and we sold this apartment. Having moved out.
The story is not very scary, but then I was scared. When I was little, but already sleeping alone about 6 to 7 years old. I woke up at night because I heard someone's weak breathing. I continued to lie, but I opened my eyes. I distinctly saw some tall, thin being. I raised my eyes and looked at him. He looked at me. A moment of silence, and he whispers to me, "Sleep." Then I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up and realized what happened at night. I didn't sleep normally for another 2 to 3 days. I didn't reveal this to anyone. No one would believe me.
When I was 11 years old, my parents left home and left me at home alone. I'm very afraid of the dark. It was already evening, and I went to the kitchen to drink tea. But suddenly the light went out and they started knocking sharply on the door. I asked who was there, but he was silent and there was a man in the peephole. I can't describe those emotions. It turns out that this man who broke into my door was a drunken man. It's good that the door was locked. I wonder what would happen if it were not locked. Somewhere after an hour of torment, the light turns on. I didn't want to tell my parents this story, but now I can share this story with you.
It was a dark and stormy night, and I was driving on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. I had been on the road for hours and was starting to get tired, so I decided to pull over and rest for a while. As I was dozing off, I heard a strange noise outside my car. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind, but the noise grew louder and more persistent. I finally mustered the courage to get out of my car and investigate. What I saw still haunts me to this day. There was a figure standing in the shadows, staring at me with empty eyes. Its body was contorted in an unnatural way, and its skin was pale and clammy. I couldn't make out any features on its face, but I knew it wasn't human. I was frozen in fear as the figure started to move towards me, slowly and deliberately. I tried to run back to my car, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure was getting closer and closer, and I could feel its breath on my neck. Just as it was about to grab me, I woke up in a cold sweat. It was all just a nightmare, or so I thought. The next day, I was driving on the same road and saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was the same figure from my nightmare, standing in the shadows and watching me. I quickly drove away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still following me. Since then, I've been seeing the figure everywhere I go. It's always lurking in the shadows, watching me with those empty eyes. I don't know what it wants from me, but I'm afraid it's only a matter of time before it catches up to me.